crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? And I think that this is a very prescient quote in terms of what we're experiencing in our country right now, when the American dream is deferred for many, many people. And I would like to address that in this, from the lens of medicine, and specifically from the lens of behavioral health. I'd like to lead with something very familiar to a lot of us, which is what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what I see this as in a very divided country, in a very split world that we all live in right now, looking back at the things that unite us as one human family, I see this as our needs. We all share the same basic human needs. And I think that Maslow did a very good job of defining this in a somewhat organized kind of way. And so if you look at the bottom of this pyramid, of this hierarchy of needs, we all have the same physiologic needs. We have a need for food, water, warmth, and rest, in terms of our physical bodies. Above that, we have a need for security and safety. That's a universal human need shared by all of us. Above that, we have a need to belong to a community and a need to be loved and to express love. And that's both through intimate relationships and through friends. Above that, and we see the need for esteem. We have a need to be recognized as competent and as able. And Maslow defines this as prestige and a feeling of accomplishment. And with that being achieved, we have a need for self-fulfillment. And that is really at the top. That's the last piece of this pyramid. And that's what's called self-actualization. And that's achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. I believe this is, in my terms, this is productively expressing one's truest self. This is our why. This is our why. And what I see, folks that are truly living their highest need, their self-actualization, in most cases, that means at some level, they are meeting the other more basic needs of others. And what you begin to see is that built into this need of the individual is actually a virtuous feedback loop, a virtuous cycle in which the needs of others are built as well. And that's the mechanism of community and healing, as I see it. So again, just to reiterate, we see basic needs at the very bottom. We see that are universal. We see universal psychological needs. And then we see a need for ultimately purpose, which is also a universal human need. The logic behind this is that there is intended to be some degree of progression from the lowest levels to the highest levels. At some degree, this is a developmental model as well, where the needs of very young children, right, are very physical. They need food, warmth, safety, right? We see the needs of adolescents and of young adults as being psychological, and we see the needs of perhaps folks having career changes, midlife crises, changes in relationships. There's a need for finding that purpose. And sometimes we change directions when we see that in middle life, we are not living our highest calling or our highest self. The assumption within all of this, and this is where I begin to take some issue with Maslow. If you look to the right of the screen, implicit in this description of human progress is the assumption of health. And that includes behavioral health. Not everyone has equal access to the elements, to the environment, and to the internal capacity to climb this hierarchy in a progressive way. And I really want to look at what happens when we don't have equal access to that through health. I want to define health with a couple of key terms. According to the World Health Organization, health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And what's really interesting is, from having been a family physician, when we don't address the social determinants of health, right? We see people who are sick, they stay sick. They stay sick. And it's not that, they have a deficit of, for example, insulin prescriptions, right? That's easy. We can take care of that. What's often lacking is an understanding of why they might need to address that. Do they have a refrigerator in which to store that? Do they have a safe home in which their medication can be protected from theft or loss? And those factors become much more complicated. And suddenly, a very straightforward practice of medicine, right? Somebody needs insulin, let's give them some insulin, becomes this intricate dance with their social context. And that's when medicine becomes very, very interesting. And that's when nurses like Ebony become so, so incredibly crucial to healing our people. I want to also define another term, which is behavioral health. This is defined by a government agency called SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Behavioral health, according to SAMHSA, is the promotion of mental health, resilience, and well-being, the treatment of mental and substance use disorders, and the support of those who experience or are in recovery from these conditions, along with their families and communities. Again, we're looking beyond this individual has an alcohol problem, let's get him to stop drinking, done, right? No, it's not that simple. And the definition of recovery involves the family, it involves the community, and really it involves the individual being developed far beyond the absence of substance intake, actually into finding their purpose, into finding their way of climbing Maslow's hierarchy of needs as an individual, and very much through the mutual aid organizations, building the needs, building the strengths of others in the community. And I'll tell you, that's why it works. Going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I want to look at what happens when we don't have the appropriate resources and when folks are not able to climb this and meet their own needs. We have trauma and addiction. By definition, when your basic needs are not met, when your need for safety and security is not met, that is trauma. That itself is trauma. Comes in many different forms. Now, one of my favorite authors is a doctor from Canada. He's actually also a family doctor specializing in addiction by the name of Gabor Mate. He has written and spoken extensively on the gateway drug of addiction, not being cannabis, but being trauma. And so you begin to see the pathology or the breakdown of when these basic human needs are not met, the pathology and the disease state that occurs. Going up a little higher up, we mentioned that all people have a basic psychological need for belongingness, love, and esteem. When those needs are not met, we develop anxiety and depression. And that is, again, treatable, but there's also a greater social cause in all of this. Climbing up the hierarchy a little further, assuming somebody has their basic needs met, there's needs for safety and security met, their psychological needs are met. What happens if the only way that they can meet those needs is inconsistent with who they actually are as a person, with their greatest calling? Well, they become frustrated and discouraged. And again, we begin to see a breakdown of anxiety and depression. We may see impulsive behaviors. We may see the classic midlife crisis, where we see people walking away from stable relationships, walking away from family obligations, walking away from a career that may otherwise meet their basic needs. But if it doesn't meet their highest need, their highest calling, and their purpose, that's dangerous. And we see a destruction of somebody meeting their own needs, and we see pathology. I will say that in the millennial generation of which I'm a part, we see a huge amount of this. Even in folks that are able to have their basic and even psychological needs met, we see a great discontent in folks that are disconnected from their purpose. We see frustration and discouragement. I want to go into Yucca Valley a little bit here by the numbers. And we want to make this beginning, again, this is Reach Out Yucca. We want to talk about some local information here. And so forgive me, a little bit of my information is a little outdated here. This is from the federal government in the 2010 census. And let me see if I can share, if you all can see this. Okay, we're going to go to new share. There we go. Okay, we're going to share this screen that I have up here. Can you all see the statistics from the Census Bureau? Okay. Andy, are you able to see that?
Yes, I'm able to see it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so what we see essentially is the statistics we pulled on Yucca Valley, California, versus the United States. And obviously, there's this huge size difference. 21,777 people were enumerated back in 2010. We had about 328 million in the greater United States. Let's see if we can go ahead and scroll down a little bit here. Excuse me. What we see basically is in terms of the racial breakdown, not a huge difference. 82.9% were defined as Caucasian or white, 76.3% in the United States. Not a huge difference. African American, 4.9% in Yucca Valley, 13.4% in the United States. That's a significant difference. Native American, we see 1.5%. In Yucca Valley, we see 1.3% in the greater United States, quite similar. And similarly, we see Hispanic or Latino, the next large group, 19.1%, 18.5%, very, very close. White alone, non-Hispanic, 69.2% in Yucca Valley, 60% in the greater United States. Let me see, I'm having a little bit of trouble scrolling down here. Let's see, I don't want to waste too much time scrolling down, but essentially what we see on this screen is that the demographics of the United States are actually very similar to the demographics that we see in Yucca Valley. In terms of a sort of average American town, Yucca Valley is quite average. What we see is one major difference. And I actually highlighted that on this screen here. The major difference that I see in all of these statistics between the United States and Yucca Valley, California, is health. Of adults with a disability under age 65, the percentage was almost double in Yucca Valley, 14.6%, as opposed to 8.6% in the greater United States. In terms of insurance rates, we see in terms of insurance coverage for folks 65 and under, it's almost identical, 9.6 versus 9.5%. But there is a major difference in Yucca Valley in terms of our health. I also wanted to talk about homelessness. In descending order, the homeless population, and again, this statistic comes from a federal, what's called the count in place annual enumeration of undomiciled individuals. And so we went through San Bernardino County, and I believe this data is from 2018, from the point in time count. And what we see throughout the cities were San Bernardino in general had 646 individuals. City of Victorville had 263 homeless individuals. Redlands 143, Upland 125. Some of these numbers may surprise you. Barstow had 93, Ontario had 90. Fontana 72, Rialto 71, Rancho Cucamonga 64 homeless individuals enumerated at this time. Yucca Valley had 59 individuals. And you know, that number may not sound like a lot, but remember the population from the Census Bureau, Yucca Valley only has 21,777 people enumerated in 2010. Here, 8 years later, we're counting a disproportionately high number of individuals that are homeless. Highland has 49, Loma Linda 46, Colton 42, Adelanto 30, Chino 28, Hesperia 27, 29 Palms 20, Josh Tree 19, Crestline 18, Apple Valley 17, Needles way out there at the Arizona border with 11, Yucaipa 11, Chino Hills 10, Montclair 8, Muskogee 7, Bloomington 7. They, for some reason, double counted Chino Hills again with 6, Morongo Valley 4, Phelan 4, Running Springs 3, and Grand Terrace 1. And so we see that proportionately, our number of undomiciled individuals is quite high in Yucca Valley for a town of relatively few. The other thing we want to talk about is the economics. We often overlook economic health as a determinant of health of the individual. In terms of poverty, we pulled some statistics on wealth and poverty in Yucca Valley. We look at the percentage of individuals living in poverty in 2017, and this was determined to be 21.2%. We see for white non-Hispanic individuals, we see 16.8%. For African American residents, we see 53.5%. For Hispanic or Latino, we see 26.2%. For Native American or Indian residents, we see 39.3% living within what would be defined as federally defined poverty. For other race individuals, we see 44.5%. For 2 or more races, we see 23.9%. And what's interesting is we also look at wealth, right? And how do most of us accumulate wealth, right? Most of us, don't have, a company and a trust fund, right? Most of us, we have a job. Maybe if we're fortunate enough, we buy a house. Maybe if we're fortunate enough, we're able to pay down that mortgage. Most individuals' wealth, and I think this may have been part of what Langston Hughes was referring to in The Dream, right? For me, that's the American dream. And a part of that is home ownership, right? And for most of us, that's what financial stability, or in other terms, that's what wealth means, right? Wealth comes from the value of our homes, right? The estimated median house or condo value in 2017 in Yucca Valley was defined as $187,000, 78 cents. In 2000, it was 78,000. So we see a market increase in approximately 17 years. But compared to Greater California, the average value of a home is $509,000, $500,000 in wealth. And so what we see is, what does that mean for mobility for our residents? What does that mean for perhaps down the road if we have a major illness in the family, in terms of a reverse mortgage, to pull out the value of that home and to help ourselves or a loved one in financial need, perhaps during an emergency? It means that we're significantly limited. And that has to do with home values. And that's another marker of our economic health. One of the other things we look at is safety and security, looking at Maslow's hierarchy. Violent crime in 2018 from Yucca Valley, and this is from citydata.com, showed 226.1 events per the US average, and I believe this is per 100,000 individuals extrapolated. And the US average is 207.3. So our violent crime rate is a little bit higher. What we see is that our property crime rate, however, in Yucca Valley is a little bit lower. It's better. So the likelihood that a property-related crime, what I mean by that is perhaps a nonviolent robbery, break-in, burglary, and automobile theft, or petty theft. The crime rate is 158.7, where this US average is 189.3 events per 100,000. And so what we see is the likelihood of a crime against the person is actually higher in Yucca Valley, as opposed to with a lower percentage of property crime rate likelihood. Again, believe it or not, this is a marker of health. What does this mean for individuals' sense of safety and security? Well, It means that we face some challenges. I will say also, I don't want to bore you with too many statistics, but marching out the statistics for the last 10 years, there was a market increase in 2015. And I would pose this as a question, really, this is a dialogue here. What happened in Yucca Valley in 2015 that may explain the market increase in criminal behavior? I don't know. I personally don't know. But some of our partners may have some ideas. And that may speak to some of the needs. And that answer may not occur right now, but that's worth pondering and that's worth discussing. That's the doom and gloom, guys. Sorry about that. That's the bad news here. Are you able to see this next slide? Okay, thank you, Andy. One of the other needs we have are some of the need for belongingness, for love. Said another way, that's community, folks. That is community. And this is where Yucca Valley, being a smaller town, is really, really strong. Churches are one of, for many people, not for everyone, but for many folks, that is a huge marker of community, right? And for a small town of 21,777 people as of 2010, look at the number of churches. This is just from a basic Google Maps. I know that our locals and our folks that really know the town better, I'm sure can speak of many other community organizations that may have a religious tone, that may not have a religious tone. But just from looking for searches in Google earlier this week, look at these churches. It's a huge number of communities, communities of faith, communities of mutual support. Church is not for everyone. Looking at AA meetings, right? AA in the desert is one of the most, and I would encourage you all to pop onto this link if you could. I don't want to bore you because it's switching between screens can be a little bit awkward, but I will say that AA in the desert is one of the most impressive AA directories that I've ever seen. I've actually called these guys before. I've attended meetings myself for Al-Anon as well as AA, and they're fantastic. You call the AA in the desert phone number and a person, a human being actually picks up. She's a person in Al-Anon. She's phenomenal. She was kind and had all kinds of ideas about where I could get some help for me and my family personally. There are men's groups. There are women's groups. There are speaker meetings where somebody shares their testimony. There are open meetings. There are beginner meetings. There are meetings for the 12 steps. There are meetings for as Bill sees it. There are meetings for one day at a time, essentially, or what's called just for today. All kinds of different things, right? If you can't find an AA meeting in that directory that does something for you, keep looking because there's a lot of help out there as well. And I will say AA is not for everyone. Some folks identify more with NA. NA also has a good presence out there. And I would say also there are things like Celebrate Recovery. There are Refuge Recovery. And as you said, perhaps this coronavirus thing obviously is very inconvenient and has forced a lot of organizations to think differently about how they do business. Many of these meetings are online. So if you don't want to drive out to a meeting, Palm Desert, for a lot of us in early recovery, transportation, right? What's the first thing they take away from you if you got a drinking problem? Driver's license, right? DUI, bam, right? And that's very, very debilitating if you're in the high desert, right? And maybe you found a great meeting. Well, if you've got an internet connection, if you've got some kind of technology, an iPad, a computer, a laptop, a smartphone, you can connect to these meetings. Is it a little weird at first? You bet, right? Is the basic element of healing very much present? You bet. And that's called community. And that's called community. The other thing is, look what we're doing here. This organization itself is a community organization. Reach out Yucca Valley, reach out West End, depending on where you're at. These community organizations, as well as many others. I know that there are parents groups that are forming right now, kind of organically, for those of us with young kids in school who are now, school teacher and, worker and employee and, person who's supposed to run a household, right? We're given these tasks. There are all kinds of groups. If you find your group, your people on Facebook or whatever it is, that's your medicine. You need that. You need that, and that basic human need can be met in some pretty novel kinds of ways. Mental health services, right? We have seen a massive increase in demand for mental health services within the County of County of San Bernardino Department of Behavioral Health. If ever there was a time when folks needed help, it's now, right? Our coping skills are pushed to the limit. Our finances, right, are pushed to the limit. Our kids are pushed to the limit, right? When was the last time we spent, the entire day as a family, day in and day out, with the kids trying to do their schooling, with partners, adult partners in the house? Perhaps due to financial constraints, many of us have loved ones, elderly loved ones, or siblings, adult siblings living in the house. If that isn't going to cause stress, please tell me, because I want to move in with you. But you got something figured out. But I think most of us at a very personal level are very, very stressed. And then what happens when we go to work, right? Or we're in that work Zoom meeting, right? What message are we hearing, right? Times are tough, tighten the belt, more productivity, right? What does that do to a person? Stress, right? It's very, very normal to feel stress. And I wanted to share some resources about mental health, right? And this includes anxiety, depression, right? Many of us lose our insurance if our employment changes, right? And so the Department of Behavioral Health accepts Medi-Cal. If you lose your insurance, right, you have healthcare either under the Affordable Care Act or through Medi-Cal, what have you. DBH will take care of you. We have Yucca Valley Department of Behavioral Health office. We offer services for adult, for children, alcohol and drug treatment, mental health, ranging all the way from, maybe I'm feeling a little bit down and the partner and I are, my wife and I are having some difficulties. We'd like to talk to a therapist. Maybe our adolescent children are acting out. They have therapy for children. They have psychiatric services. If perhaps, my loved one has a serious mental illness, they lost their insurance, what do? Talk to Yucca Valley. They can help you. They have psychiatric services. They're very qualified to take care of your needs. The other thing, if somebody's in crisis, right? Somebody has a breakdown. It's just too much. Valley Star Crisis Walk-In Center, we have their phone number. They're local, and they can take care of folks for weeks, months at a time to get somebody stable. They accept walk-ins. For transitional aged youth, we have the Tay Center, Transitional Age Youth. For young people, 18 to 24, that's a very, very tough time to be, right? Just in general, under the best of times. You add a pandemic, you add a huge economic recession, you add limited job opportunities, limited opportunities to move out and to engage in a community, to do all of the things that transitional age people do, right? Take that away. Folks are going to benefit from some help, right? And this is life skills, job skills, employment. There's this new term being thrown around about adulting, right? How do you adult? Well, the Tay Centers can help. The Tay Centers can help. So if you or a loved one or someone in your community is between 18 and 24, maybe they need a little help, a little guidance, mentorship. The Transitional Age Youth Centers can help. And we've got one out there on Palms Highway in Yucca Valley. It's a great program. Lastly, not to be too heavy here, but the National Suicide Hotline. This is a number. Please take out your smartphone, your cell phone. Please write this number down. Please put this in your phone. You may not be personally experiencing suicidality, but there's probably somebody in your who you know who will, either now or at some point in the next year. It's not something that's real comfortable to talk about, perhaps, but if you can provide this resource, this is very, very high quality. Again, you actually talk to a human being, to a person who's got some expertise in counseling folks. And for most people with suicidal ideation or thoughts of harming themselves, most of them are not really wanting to die. They're trying to figure out how the heck to live. And the suicide hotline is a phenomenal resource. Please program that into your phone if you haven't already. Lastly, I want to talk about substance use. This is my baby here. We have this program, and I am going to bring this one up. We have outpatient mental health services in Yucca Valley. I'm going to change my share here. New share. There it is. Okay. So this is a brochure from MHS, Mental Health Services Yucca Valley. They offer a program called there is a Center for Change. They offer outpatient, so that means you stay at home and then you go in for treatment a couple times a week to treat not only the addiction, but the underlying causes of addiction, right? Why is alcohol better than feeling whatever I'm feeling, right? And what can I do about it? They offer DUI services. They help folks to learn how to cope and how to live a substance-free and a healthy lifestyle. I want to change my share here, and so they are local. We've had some really good success with them, and I partner closely with them personally. So I co-manage a lot of folks through my DBH operations that are also seen for outpatient services. So groups, one-on-one counseling, and community building to live a sober and healthy lifestyle. Again, 2 more phone numbers I would really like you to have in your phone. SARC, Screening, Assessment, and Referral Center, SARC, SARC. They're right here in my office. They're actually upstairs. I'm on the 2nd floor. They're on the 3rd floor. This is a big call center that we operate here at DBH, 24 hours a day. Now, most of the time, I'd recommend you call during business hours, 8 to 5, 909-421-4601. But if you or a loved one is in crisis, call the 24-hour access line. Somebody will get right back to you. You will talk to a human being, and you will get your phone call returned. 1-800-968-2636. Again, 1-800-968-2636. It's a toll-free number. They will do a comprehensive evaluation of the individual who calls in regarding their substance use needs. They'll recommend them and approve them for a level of care. If they have Medi-Cal here in our county, that's funded by the county and through their Medi-Cal benefits. If they do not have Medi-Cal, if they have no insurance, or if they have out of county, we also have some vehicles in which we can provide those benefits. So essentially, we take all comers. There is no wrong door here. Share this information, please, if you can. Lastly, I want to talk about what I actually do day in and day out, and what I'll be doing after this call finishes. Medication-assisted treatment services. So medication, right? You may or may not know about this, but there are prescription medications that help people get sober and stay sober, right? Y'all are probably familiar with methadone, right? That's been around for 45 years, right? That's been around longer than I have. It's a great drug. It works, but it's not for everyone. Some folks prefer to not go into methadone clinics. We have a lot of other options. We have something called buprenorphine or Suboxone, which is a medication that can be prescribed over the phone or through telehealth by video chat. And that helps people manage their withdrawal initially, and then to manage their cravings for opioid. And one of the added benefits is it's sometimes used for severe pain. Sometimes folks will develop an opioid issue because their pain issue is just out of control. Buprenorphine products can really, really help without people feeling high or altered, and that's something they can stay on. We also have other options. We have medications for alcohol use disorder, medications that manage people's cravings and help them to stay sober. We are, I will say, within my career personally, I am hoping to see something for stimulant use disorder for methamphetamine. The literature, the research right now is controversial. There are a few things that have been tried out there, but we have some really out-of-the-box thinkers that are willing to keep trying new things and see what we can get to help our people with the meth problem, to also have that support. But even in the absence of medication-assisted treatment for methamphetamine, we have all kinds of services for folks in terms of outpatient. We also offer the SARC program. If the problem is severe enough, we can recommend and fund residential treatment. So folks can come in 30, 60, sometimes 90 days They have meals, they have housing covered, they go to groups, they have individual counseling, and they really help that person kickstart their recovery. And lastly, they're discharged with a plan for meeting their physical health, their mental health, and their sobriety needs. So that's what we do here. I want to end with a closing remark. And this comes from one of my favorite authors, Mark Twain. The only way to keep your health is to eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. And this is from Following the Equator by Mark Twain. And I bring this up simply because it can be uncomfortable having these conversations about substance use, about mental health. But the only way to heal is to have a tough conversation, as Mark Twain said, to do what you'd rather not do and to do it for the right reasons. That's a step towards health. I want to thank you all for your time and attention. And I would welcome questions, comments, feedback, disagreements. That's okay as well. And thank you all for your time. Great to be here, and really, truly an honor to get to speak on this topic of inequality, particularly at this time, and through the lens of health as one way, not the only way, but one way to aggressively rebalance the scales of inequity. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Avalos. I actually want to read out two questions, one that was put in the chat box while you were presenting, and another one that was actually emailed to us. So the first question is from McKenna Pipoli, and the question is it possible to achieve esteemed needs and revert back down due to addiction or other life difficulties?
Very much so, right. One of the best quotes I ever saw, I saw it printed on somebody's baseball hat somewhere, and it said, "Success is not final." And I thought, at the time, I was like, that felt like a challenge. That felt like a threat, right, to me. But my God, it speaks to the core of my personal insecurity, which is that if we achieve something, that doesn't mean you can't go back, right? And this is one of the most powerful differentiating factors when you talk to somebody who's got, I was mentored by a doctor with 37 years sobriety from opioids. And patients would often ask him, "How'd you do it, man? I mean, I'm white knuckling and I got 3 days and I feel like I can't get a fourth." You're sitting here with 37 years. And he said, "Man, I wake up every day knowing that I am one bad decision away from losing everything." You absolutely can lose it all. And with that humility, I think that in fact is what ensures your security. Knowing that nothing is guaranteed, and knowing that your success in one domain of your life, success is never final, right? And the sort of the dance of human development is one in which you're continually developing. And I'll tell you one thing as well, personally, that I've seen is that I was told this also by another mentor. It was late at night in a neonatal ICU. Not a happy place if you've ever been in one. This is a place where the youngest, newest babies, the sickest babies go, and sometimes they don't come out. And this was a doctor who had spent 30 years bringing those babies back from death's door sometimes, and sometimes having the horrible task of telling a young family that your baby didn't make it. I had this conversation with her late one night. It was just the two of us. Everybody else had gone home, and I was just packing up, ending the day. And she said, "John, if I've learned one thing in 30 years in this place, it's that happiness comes from helping others." And putting that in context, I think it means that for most of us, self-actualization isn't all about the self. I think that the top layer of that pyramid actually means giving it away, building the lower rungs for others. And I think that through that, McKenna, I think that that's where we start to build some security. The 12 steps follow this very, very closely. There's something called the 12 step, right? And that means 20, 30, 40 years into your recovery, when you can recite, I mean, the big book, and you can speak articulately, and you've got testimony up the wazoo, right? You don't show up for you, right? You get up at 6 a.m. and you go to that meeting for the person scared out of their mind that's going to walk in, who's insecure as all heck and doesn't know what to do, and has 30 reasons to run out that door, and they might. You show up for them, and that's the 12th step. And that's where your self-actualization, your purpose, intersects with their basic psychological needs. And I think that that's what recovery really looks like. But substance use does not have a monopoly on that concept. Take it and run with it, whatever your challenge is in your life, whatever your domain is. And that's wisdom that I borrowed from people much smarter than me. But I hope that that means something to you. Thank you. Great question.
Okay, and then another question. Actually, I just saw we had another one in the chat, so I'll be reading two other questions. The first one is, since COVID-19 mental illness has become an issue because of the stay-at-home order, have you seen an influx in patient care since the pandemic? And this was a question that was emailed to us.
Yes. The short answer is, oh yeah. Oh yeah, very much so. Whatever your struggles are, right? This is when your challenges will show themselves, right? If your challenge is frustration tolerance, right, and anger, this is when you're going to show it. If your frustration tolerance, if your issue is depression, this is when that's going to come out, right? If you struggle with a conflicted relationship, right, this is where couples are going to have problems, right? If your struggle is substance use, this is when relapse potential is highest, simply because there is a universal struggle that we are all facing. And that's the dark side of this. I would say the positive side of this is we know that, right? We all know that. And this is also the time where community, the answer is not, Prozac, right? Let's pump it into the water, right? And we'll cure everybody. That ain't the problem, right? The solution looks a lot like what I see on my screen, which is people from all kinds of different walks of life that care about each other, that are coming together to share ideas and to be vulnerable to one another about things that actually matter, right? Sometimes that means having a conversation that's a little awkward, right? Having, to your question about having, Thanksgiving via Zoom, that's probably what my Thanksgiving is going to look like. That's awkward as heck, right? But that's what it takes. And we're going to do it. And I hope that it's the only time we ever have to do that. But accepting the discomfort of saying what needs to be said, I think that that's the medicine. Getting good at awkward conversations. I will often say that in different organizations. Get good at those ones. The reason they're uncomfortable and awkward is because they're important, not because they should be avoided. But yes, to your question, Ebony, yeah, we've had a large influx, relapses, both psychiatric relapses, as well as substance use related relapses. That these conditions that we treat in behavioral health, success is never final, right? And so that is the natural history or natural course of these diseases that we treat. Sometimes you're going to have a good day, a month, or a good couple of years, but stuff's going to happen, and the only thing that matters is that we get back up again. And the Department of Behavioral Health is more than happy to treat folks the third time, the 13th time, the 47th time. We're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. As you can tell, I'm not very old. I have about 30 years before I can even say the word retirement without being laughed at here. And so, I'm not going anywhere, and my cohort of colleagues here is not either. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really insightful. And then we have another question. How do we begin to bridge the gap in healthcare disparities and implement prevention strategies, including mental health assessments for youth in a virtual world? And that was from Christy Bethel.
Phenomenal question. If I had to give a short answer, I would say modeling, through modeling. And by that, I mean sharing our own stories, right? I've read all the books. I took all the classes, right? Doesn't matter, right? The textbook stuff is far less important than an individual testimony. What engages people, particularly young folks, is when I talk about my cousin, my uncle, my extensive family history of substance use, right? That's what connects with people. But what that costs me is vulnerability, right? I don't get to sit here and be the expert, right, with the lab coat and the tie and the fancy Latin words and the technical knowledge, right? You can look that stuff up on Wikipedia, right? You all have smartphones, right? What connects with people is vulnerability and human connection. And I think that in terms of youth, young people in this up and coming generation, the Gen Z folks, and even younger, you're not going to fool them, right? With technical expertise, right? Authenticity is valued incredibly highly by our younger generations. And I think you can't fake that. And I don't think you should. And I think that effective engagement strategies are going to be about being real with young people. And usually that means being vulnerable. We have, definitely worked in this county to make those services available. One of the benefits of vulnerability and openness as people, not as technical experts, but as human beings that have families and life stories, that challenges the stigma, right? That's the medicine that dissolves the stigma. And that's how we dissolve shame, right? And we do that through that first word I use called modeling. We model it, right? And I think that we can be strong examples of what transparency looks like, and what living without the burden of stigma for both mental health as well as substance use, what that looks like. And I think that that's how we pull this disease and these problems out from the shadows, and into an open conversation where we can actually do something about it, right? There are, as I've communicated, I think in this message, there are numerous resources available. But we can have the best treatment in the world. It's not going to mean squat unless somebody's willing to go have that conversation, right? And that takes tremendous courage and vulnerability. And we can model that in our own lives to continue to challenge the stigma around mental health and substance use. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avalos. There's actually another question. I'll translate it. So Martha Rocha is asking, how can someone in the simplest or most practical form support someone that just came out of detox and rehab from alcoholism?
Okay. That's a phenomenal question. That is one of the hardest questions I've ever been asked. The first step is to take care of yourself. The first step is to take care of yourself as a family of somebody in very early recovery, both from alcohol, from mental health conditions, as well as from other substance use issues. I don't think it's an option to not get some help. At a minimum, that means Al-Anon for me. At a minimum, that means Al-Anon. You've got, unless you've got some incredible community organization that you're a part of that gets it and that can openly talk about it. But you need your own support system, right? Because that person in early recovery, they may do great, they may never look back, they may never relapse, they may Heck, they may become a, you know, senator and, you know, change the world, right? Or do great things. That's awesome. But in all likelihood, they're going to struggle early on, right? This is a tough problem. And it challenges everything in a person's life, right? Their identity, how they spend their time, their money, where they work, right? Who their people are, right? How do they spend their time outside of work, right? How do they cope with their problems, right? Divorcing yourself from, you know, Johnny Walker or Jim Beam, that's a very big deal. Being a part of that support system is an incredibly admirable thing to do, but it's not going to be something you do alone. And I would suggest you get help. One of the things that you will do in addition to feeling supported in those communities, in Al-Anon and other community groups, you will learn about boundaries. And what boundaries are really all about, in my opinion, is not stealing other people's problems, right? Not stealing their problems, right? If that person, that loved one, gets out of, you know, rehab and they go and get themselves a DUI and they lose their license, lose their car, right? When they're sitting there yelling at you, you need to take them to work, right? Boundaries may mean helping them help themselves, right? Here's my bus pass, you can have this. Here's a bus schedule. Let's figure out what time you need to get up and let's see how you can solve your own problem, right? I can solve your problem real quick, right? I can drive you to work. But how have you grown through that? You've grown dependent on me, codependent, you might say, right? Spending an hour to talk through the bus schedule and how to figure out the buses, that's called growing independence. And that takes boundaries. And that ain't easy, right? Most of us are not born with great boundaries. We have to learn them. And we have to reinforce them. And that's what we can do. That's one of the most powerful gifts we can give as loved ones to an addict struggling. Thank you. Thank you. Great question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that answer. Does anyone else have any last minute questions for Dr. Avalos before we move on to the next item? All right, so if no questions are asked right now, you could always put it in the chat and they could be addressed later on throughout the town hall, or we will also be sending out a follow-up email to you all. I would like to move on to the next activity and item on the agenda, which is a breakout room. I could read out the question, or Andy, if you want to share the screen so everybody could see the question, and we'll give the breakout rooms about 10 minutes to answer this question, and then we'll come back to discuss and kind of announce some of the highlights that were talked about in the groups. So the question is, what are some obstacles you believe marginalized communities may face in seeking help with substance use or mental health disorders? So Andy will take care of us. She'll be breaking us up into different groups, again, for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and come back and just have a quick debrief on what was discussed in your group. So Andy, go ahead, and then we'll have the question on the chat for each work group.